Hello, my name is Priyanka Chandrasekhar. I am a movement practitioner based out of Bangalore in India. I have trained in the classical dance forms of Bharatanatyam and Kathak for many years. A few years back, I started and founded a space called Nirali. Along with training in the technique of Bharatanatyam, at Nirali, we are reimagining the classical dance, Indian dance pedagogy. So it's a space which aspires to be non-hierarchical. It's a space which encourages and nurtures discussion, review, critique, expression, questions, and everything that I will be speaking to you through this video will be from my experiences of creating the space with a group of people that I work with, along with my own experiences of building the new body of work that I am making for performance. Up front, I wanted to start by talking about how when sort of Shivaangee reached out to me and we had these discussions, I went back and thought about how some of these questions and investigations were almost inescapable for me, especially when I started to create my own body of work and when I started to enter into this role of facilitation or exchange that I do through Nirali. And I'm very curious to know how it is possible for so many dance practitioners, so many dancers to not engage in these questions. I feel like it's almost impossible to have not encountered them. So I want to also acknowledge while we are having this discussion, and I feel very, very grateful to have been included in this conversation. I also want to sort of say that there are a lot of us who aren't thinking about some of these things or who are not actively engaging with these questions, and that is something that as a community we all need to sort of reflect about. One of the main themes of this discussion, as I saw, was whether Bharatanatyam can be used to critically engage with the world around us. This has been the basis of almost all the work that I do in both my solo performance as well as at Nirali. So I feel like I want to start by talking about this. Over time, I have realized that Bharatanatyam can be a very effective tool. One, of course, I feel like the form itself allows for a lot of communication. Yes, it's codified, but there are ways in which you can break the form, you can make it malleable to say what you want to say. That has been my experience. So that's one part of it. The other part of it also, what I find interesting is there is very little suspicion associated with Bharatanatyam, be it audiences, be it organizers, even authorities. For instance, if I'm dressed like a Bharatanatyam dancer or like a Bharatanatyam teacher, I'm sure I won't get caught for, say, drunken driving. I mean, why is a separate question, and that's another problem in itself which we can also discuss and talk about. But what I'm trying to say is that it can be a very interesting tool of resistance because perhaps nobody is expecting it. So in my experience, it is a very effective way of engaging critically with the world. So many of my friends have often said that you can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, because yes, Bharatanatyam does sit on a lot of oppression. It sits on the history of marginalization and erasure. But I feel like using the form, of course, changing it, breaking it, and then still using it to say what you want to say can be a very interesting form of resistance. Before I answer this question of what is form and what is pedagogy, I think it's really interesting to talk a little bit about why they are not distinct things in the Indian classical dance understanding. In my experience, it's predominantly because of this Guru Shishya Parampara that we so religiously follow in classical dance. The fact that it has been ingrained into us. We have grown up with this idea that whatever my teacher teaches is what I have to teach. The way she teaches is how I should teach. We have very easily and comfortably become a vessel to just sort of pass on. So I think that growing up learning Bharatanatyam, pedagogy itself was never accessible to us. As a student of Bharatanatyam, I think what I accessed in my years of learning it was only the form, only the skill, only the technique. I don't think there was an opportunity to say perhaps understand how to create, how to compose, how to choreograph, or even ask questions saying why am I sitting in Aramandi, why am I doing Saraswati like this, why am I moving so fast. I don't think there was space, or perhaps there was space but we were sort of in a way trained not to ask. And because I never accessed pedagogy at all when I was learning Bharatanatyam, I am not too surprised that both of them seem like the same thing today, because that is what was expected out of us, that we teach what we were taught. Interestingly, I've had many conversations with my own teacher, actually disagreements with my own teacher, and I also know a friend who had a conversation with a very famous guru about how once we sort of buy the music from our teacher about of a particular composition, it is expected out of us that we perform the same choreography in the same way. And often we are told that if you want to do your own choreography, if you want to innovate and create, then you go create your own music for it. So, and these conversations are very common. So, and it's almost impossible given how the economy functions in the art space, especially in classical dance. It's almost impossible for somebody who's just starting out to create their own music. So, what I'm trying to say is, because of these gatekeeping tendencies and because of this tradition where we have to follow this Guru Shishya Parampara, I don't think we access pedagogy at all, and no wonder that it both looks like the same thing. For me, after these many years of dealing with form and pedagogy, I feel like form is the gesture, the vocabulary, the aesthetic, those little principles by which we sort of identify a particular form. But for me, pedagogy has become more about how it is articulated or how it is assimilated in the body. For me, pedagogy has to be speculative. For me, it's almost impossible for it not to be. It has to be reflective, it has to be responsive, it has to be constantly changing and evolving. It has to be messy. I feel like that those are my experiences with pedagogy for now. Also, the way that we do the classes at Nirali, it's very person-centric. So a lot of the work that we have created is based on the personal stories of the students who train here. So there is no way for it not to be constantly changing from body to body. Also, when I enter a class that I want to facilitate with 5 or 6 people, of course we work with a very small group of people. When I enter a class with just sort of 5 or 6 people, I'm always thinking, what does each person need? How will each person respond? Will it push them enough or should it not push them enough? So I'm also planning the class keeping all of these people in mind. So in my opinion, I think there is no way for pedagogy to not be speculative and confusing. I think that is how it, in my opinion, should be. It is predominantly at Nirali, and the work that I have done, it is, I'm not sure if I can call it student-led. It is student-driven for sure. Because like I said, I think about them before I enter the class, and I'm also constantly reflecting about what it did to each person and body after the class. I'm constantly asking for their feedback and reflection, and it really matters what they bring into the class, what mood they are entering into class. Like growing up, often, I've heard a lot of very senior teachers say that, leave your personal rubbish outside and then step into the dance class. But that's the opposite of what we try to create in the space, where they come in with their moods, they come in with all the baggage that they're carrying, and then we sort of do class. So then I'm still not sure if I can call it student-led, because I feel like when the class itself is happening, I'm the one sort of, the facilitator is sort of leading the exercise, but it is collaborative. And the days that I find equal collaboration are the most enriching. But it is definitely student-driven. using everyday, normal, mundane life, which we think has really nothing to offer, has actually been very helpful for me to innovate and bring into class. And I've always found those experiences extremely interesting. Of course, intention matters a lot. I think, like for example, we do adavus for the purpose of what? Skill training, stamina, or anga shuddhi, or perfection. These are the usual intentions with which we practice nritta in Bharatanatyam. But for me to now change that intent and say, we do a small check-in in class every time everybody comes in, and we just sort of see what's in the room before we start the class. So what would it mean now that you're feeling like this? Use that feeling and let the adavu change, and then explore the adavu. Or we are embodying a leaf, and now let's change, or let's break the adavu and now explore the adavu like that. So the intention has changed. Now it is not about stamina or skill, it is about exploration, it is about play, it is about mischief. So that has been extremely helpful. Nirali started with me saying to myself, I will not be my teacher, and I will do everything, and I will fill all those gaps that I found in my own learning of Bharatanatyam. So as a child, I would just sort of study and then go to dance class and come back home, do homework and sleep. I've never really had play time. So now games are a big part of everything that we do in Nirali. And children are mostly playing, and through games we now introduce dance to them, because it's about, for me it has also been about filling those gaps and doing things that I didn't get to do. In this whole process, there are some things that have been very easy to let go of. For example, a lot of the religious aspects of the form, like having, a dance class has to look a certain way. There are paintings and there are idols. All of that has been very easy to let go of. We don't have a god. We don't start the class with a namaskaram, for instance. We don't do these rituals of respect like Vijay Dashami. We don't do Guru Dakshina. Those have been the easy things to let go of. Of course, the really uncomfortable costume, jewelry, the accessory, the ghungru, all of this we have sort of moved away from. We use it if it sort of adds value, but otherwise it has been something that we have moved past. There are other things which have been extremely difficult to let go of. For example, power. I think in creating a space like this, where I'm trying to say that the pedagogy is student driven, where the space is non-hierarchical, I have had to consciously let go of power, be in class and observe and witness and not interfere but interfere, and that has been a very difficult space, very discomforting space, and often I have come back thinking, so what is safe for me? So that has been a little difficult and challenging in creating a space like this, especially when I have changed what is familiar to me. That has been a negotiation all the time. The other thing that I feel like I have let go a little, but I still have to work on a lot more, is this idea of what is neat. In Bharatanatyam, I think it's so drilled into your head as to, you have to have those perfect lines, you have to have those perfect curves. So changing that is a little difficult. I have come some way with it, but on some days I'm able to see a very tired face and say, oh, so beautiful. I'm able to see everything as a thing of beauty, but on many days I'm still going back to that problematic idea of anga shuddhi. So that is something that has been very difficult to let go of. What I've held on to, and I want to clarify, what I mean by held on to is also different. I've held on to the form with all its elements. For example, there is Aramandi, there is gestures, there is the classifications of the Ashtanaikas, there is the Navarasa. All of that I have retained only so that I can break it or I can play with it. So this idea of holding on doesn't mean pass on or keep as is. At least for me, it has been that I keep it so that I can now play with it. Because if I don't have the rules of the game, then I don't know what to play. So I have also retained compositions. For example, I do this performance as in the solo format, a very famous Devarnama called Jagadodharana, where I have retained the text, I have retained the music, I have retained the composition, but I subvert it in performance, and speak of the narrative of the ordinary child or the other child. So it is only because the form already has that am I able to critique and say another story. So that is something I have, you can say I have held on to and played with, but not held on to pass on necessarily. My entire engagement of this form of pedagogy can be summarized with one word: questions. So I think there are no answers, but there are a lot of questions, and I have with time come to really enjoy them. But to name and to sort of state a few questions that have plagued my practice, I think one very popular one is, what is the purpose of what we call pure dance or nritta, at least in the way that it was received by us, is something that I've kept going back to. Another one that I have started to think about a lot in the work that I create is, what stories can I say in my body and what stories I can't, and the problems of representation, especially given that I come from a privileged caste background. Another question that has I think stayed with me for a very long time is, what is the form and what is me? I feel like the form is so stuck in me and I'm so stuck in the form that sometimes I don't know where is me and where is the form. And I think that has been a very interesting personal question for me, which affects my dance practice a lot. So that's a question that I like to engage with, and I also like to sort of see other students engage with this, because it's very different for different people. What is rigor is something that has often come up, especially given what we see on social media, especially given the one idea of rigor, which is hours of practice, which is sweaty faces, which is about repeating. Given that, you're so bombarded with these images, how do you find the rigor that is required for your pieces, for your practice? That has been, and what is rest in the middle of rigor, and how do you negotiate rigor and rest in a practice with the body, has been something that we've been constantly exploring. Very recently, I have started to now also ask this question of, what is the relationship that the performer shares with the audience? And I saw myself asking this to a bunch of very upcoming dancers recently at an event, where I was asking them, what do you think the audience is seeing when they are seeing you? And of course, the experience can be of many things, of joy, of discomfort, of boredom. It can be all of that. But what are they actually seeing? And are we fully aware of what we are showing? And I think this relationship of seeing and experiencing is something that I'm really interested to investigate. I think the ideal world for someone like me, who is on this journey of exchange or facilitation as well as creation of new work, I think is where people are more comfortable with the idea of new, are a little less intimidated, a little less unwelcomed by the idea of something unfamiliar. I feel like even today, parents are very happy to send their children to Bharatanatyam classes where there is a uniform, where you're dressing up, or where dancers are wearing practice sari, because it's seen, it's done, they know what would come out of it. But what they don't realize is the many years that then we spend on unlearning, relearning, and all of it. But I understand that anything new, any change takes time and a lot of patience. So, but for me, an ideal world would be a very excited audience who's interested in participation and not perhaps escaping from reality. and spaces that support work that is new, that encourage work that is new. Instead, especially in a field like Indian classical dance, where you're saying the same stories in the same way, wearing the same costume, there should be a lot of spaces that are interested and excited by new work, which is political, which is personal. So I think more support, and of course a sense of community and belonging, where problematically also I think it's really important to identify with the group, whether it is the Bharatanatyam group or resisting the Bharatanatyam group. I think it's really important to feel a sense of community, to feel like you're not alone. And I think an ideal world would be where I find these people also journeying on the same path.